Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Last Hit. It's episode 4 as we head towards the 5th week of LPL already. I can't believe how fast we're getting through this split because there's only 9 weeks. We're essentially at or getting just beyond the halfway mark at this stage. Some of the teams getting to the halfway mark at very least. I'm Munchables. I'm joined by Lyric. I have a very special episode coming up for you guys. But before I jump into what's going to be happening in the episode, I've got to quickly shout out that we're on YouTube, and if you want to see us on your screen, then check YouTube out. But also we're on Spotify. So if you're on a busy commute and you want to listen on your phone, then Spotify is available for you guys as well. But the reason the episode is special is because Mr. Lyric, we've got your friend on and coaching colleague from years gone by, Jensen Go, is going to be joining us, which I'm very excited to hear because, you know, you're a bit of a five-head about the game. I've heard that he's a massive five-head about the game. I'm excited to hear you guys kind of discuss some of the coaching intricacies across the world.
Yeah, you know, sadly, we are confined to a time limit, so I'm not sure how deep we'll get into the details, but Jensen Go, one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, especially like some of his ideas on like the game, and then one of the first coaches I ever worked with who talked about systems very in-depthly, so gonna really love to hear his opinion on teams, on what team Hero likes to watch, what team you can learn from, and yeah, I feel like Jensen's a guy who's gonna provide a lot of perspective because he's been all around the world, even more than me.
He has. Verified globetrotter, honestly. We've already recorded the interview as we're recording this intro, so spoilers there, but just listen to the list of countries he spouts out. There's like 19 of them in a row or something. But before we jump into the interview, let's talk failures and faves, because this is the last hit and it's how we start every single episode. So Lyric, I'll let you start. We'll go with failures first, so we start on the low and we finish on the high. What is your failure for week number 4 of the LPL?
So my failure is not going to be specifically WE. It's not going to specifically be Mole. It's going to be Mole being benched. And there's no logic behind this being my failure. I'm just sad about it. I'm just depressed. I love Mole. Mole's a great player. And Mole was not good on this team. It did not work. If I was the coach of WE, I totally understand how you think you need a change, how you had better performance with Shanks in spring, and how he's probably practicing in solo queue with a bunch of meta champions, and you're going to give him a try because you have the pre-built synergy that you spent all that time working towards. But it still just really sucks to not have a player that you know is good not in the LPL. I feel like that's the problem. It's not that WE isn't starting Mole. It's the fact that we had this guy who was a top mid laner in summer 2020, I feel like was still a top player last split as well, and now we just don't get to see him play games, and we don't get to know, like, how do you stack up in a meta where there is more skill expression, where you can play these assassins and skirmishers and champions that you feel like he would excel on, but it's like, man, we just don't get to see it because WE's decision-making was just bad. It didn't work with Mole. Mole was playing worse, but even with Shanks, we can kind of hit on that just a little bit, that WE still ended up losing in their most recent series to, I believe it was OMG off the top of my head.
OMG, yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. WE is in a precarious position, and then now we don't get to watch Mole. Everyone's a loser. WE's a loser. WE fans are losers. I'm a loser. Mole's a loser. No one wins, Munchables.
I don't think you're a loser, sir. I think you're a great guy. Yeah, I will say, for anyone that missed it, OMG versus WE, that game 3 was spicy, to say the least. I would definitely go and check that one out, because I don't think it's quite as cut and dry as we're maybe alluding to there. But yeah, I definitely think WE, it's a weird topic right now. That team, it seems a little inconsistent. Is the word that I'll go for. But I digress. Let's not. I could talk about WE and Sooning all day long, so I'll opt out. I'm gonna go to my failure here, and I've got a bit of a different take here. I'm not picking a player or a team. I'm going with something meta based, because my failure, and this is someone who has abused this pick a lot of times in the past for Elo. Certainly back in 2020 spring, I think it was really good. With the Comet build. Lethality Varus is my failure. I think that this pick is kind of overrated, honestly. When you look at its win record overall, it's positive, but when you look at its recent win record, I think it had lost 6 of the last 10 games when I checked yesterday. I think Lethality Varus is being indexed too hard into, because I think on-hit Varus is kind of underrated right now when we've got a lot of comps that are relying on things like your Jinx and your Aphelios as late game AD carries. I think Varus can perfectly fit into that kind of category. But also things like the Ziggs being massively underutilized in the LPL. We've seen it once or twice, but like when we have seen it, I don't think it's been utilized super well. I think if you play through a Ziggs lane, you can just annihilate towers super fast and just take over the map in that way. But also, if you want to, like, one of the big things that Varus is always going to bring to the table is the fact that you can play for Dragon because you can get priority in that lane and all of that good stuff. But if you want to play for Dragon, this picks like Kalista and Draven that we're seeing creeping into the meta, we're seeing more and more of. I think they do a better job and don't. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of games where Varus, if you're not massively ahead on the lethality, just feels like it doesn't do anything. Just feels like you can't impact the game. So I'm thinking that the region is going to move away from lethality Varus. Maybe I just have a bad read on it. Maybe I'm just molding, but I just feel like we're seeing it all the time, and it regularly just feels completely underwhelming from my perspective.
So
I mean, what do you reckon, Larry?
I agree that I feel like on hit Varus isn't given enough like credit, just from the fact that, like you're saying, I feel like you have some team compositions where you bring out a Varus, and just having an AD carry that does more DPS will be needed, will be useful. The enemy team is drafted a comp where like snowballing against them will be almost impossible. And the thing is, the big reason why LPL teams and why teams overall like Varus is for the fact that he guarantees you lane prio in the bot lane against most matchup, kind of barring your support matchup is mostly neutral, right? So you're still going to get that from an on-hit Varus. Varus's laning phase is still incredibly strong. Before items come out, you still have the poke, you still have strong trades with your E. And to me, this just goes to a larger conversation of picks overall, that, you know, teams, regions, they just stick on certain picks too long or don't give other picks their due credit. You know, in your mind, it's Ziggs. You know, for me, it is things like the Braum, or we see people sticking on things like Nocturne, I feel like, too long. I feel like you just get your ideas of these champions in your head. Then we see the answer figured out. These champions start to struggle, and you don't see enough teams pick up those counters. You don't see enough teams playing Braum, or like IG bringing out the Taric when we have so many full dive compositions. You really hit on the amount of DPS champions like Jinx and Aphelios hit already. So I definitely agree. I feel like people are pigeonholing themselves into certain champions too much, which is kind of funny because we did see the Kai'Sa fall off finally. So maybe lethality Varus can work in that way. I don't think Varus will ever fall off just from that laning prio you get. And LPL is we want lane prio. We want early game strength.
I just want to like quickly add, it's not that I hate lethality Varus. I just wish people would flex the Varus. I think one of the biggest strengths of the Varus pick is you can go the two builds. I think early 2020, we saw loads of teams doing this, right? Where you'd pick the Varus early in the draft and it's like, are we going to play lethality or are we going to play on hit? It depends on the situation. I feel like right now you can do that and nobody is. I feel like it's a missed opportunity.
We've had on hit Varus twice.
I just want to see more Ziggs.
Oh God.
Let's move on. Let's move on from Varus. Okay, over to you once again, Lyric. It's time for your fave. Who's your fave coming out of week 4?
So my favorite is Rare Atom. This is actually a team I spent a ton of time prepping this week, watching a bunch of their games, trying to get like a really good grasp of how they play the game. And
I feel like I need to clip that actually. After your opinions of Rare Atom in spring, I feel like you coming in saying my favorite is Rare Atom is like, this is a rare gem of a moment.
Yeah. Because it's weird. And weirdly enough, I think RA is almost the same team exactly they were in spring. Pre-15 minutes, they're still very risk averse. They're not going to look for a lot of action. You're not going to see a lot of link up between jungle and laners. The individual laners aren't going to look for like solo kills or anything like that. It's a very standard game. They're going to play to stack dragons later on, turn that into a soul or a baron and then win out in the big like 25-30 minute team fight. But I just love the way, I love how strong their early laners are, I guess is my point. I love how like well-rounded this roster is in terms of like player strength. And with that, they were able to take down LNG, the first team to actually beat LNG. They 2-0'd them as well, so it was extremely decisive. We had amazing performances from Fofo in both games. And for anyone who watched last week, I did have Fofo in my top 15 players in the LPL list. To me, he's definitely a top 5, top 4 mid laner right now. He's right up there with the Doinbees, Knights, and Scouts of the world. And in my opinion, he's one of the players who, along with like being well-rounded, I think he actually might be one of the best laners in the mid lane. I think him and Rookie stand out to me that like when you watch their laning phases, you're just like, man, these guys are thinking of what to do on every minion, what to do like 3 waves in advance, how to set up their team, and how to get the most mileage out of what they're doing. So I think this is one of the less flashy teams, as we're going to hear Jensen say later on, but they're one of the I just like that they stick to their guns. I like that they know exactly what they're going to do. They do it every game. They don't have any player on the roster that's bad. And that's something that's exciting when you do have a mid lane meta that even if your team is slow, your mid laner can still pop off when you have a star like Fofo.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think as well, it's good to have, in this league, with as turbulent as the LPL can be, it's good to have one team that is definitely going to give you what you expect.
Yeah.
Like, there's quite a few teams in this league where I'll come into a series and I'll be like, yeah, we're going to have this team against this team, so here's what we should expect. Then we get on the Rift and it's just complete opposite. It's nice with RA that they do what it says on the tin.
There's consistency.
I appreciate that. Exactly, which is it's a rare commodity in the LPL. I think EDG, I guess, would be the other team that you could pigeonhole that to. I'm going to move over to my favorite as well, because it's not that similar of a story, but I'm going to go with a team as a whole as well here. I'm going to go with LGD. Now, I think, a lot of people are getting on board the LGD hype train, right? I think it's very easy to get on board the LGD hype train right now, but I'm going to explain why I've picked LGD in this moment, because they've just finished week 4 where they've beaten Rogue Warriors, which, not that crazy. They've beaten IG, who, I don't know, when LGD beat IG, I would have said beating IG is no big deal, and then IG went on and won a series against FPX, so I have no idea how good beating IG is at this point. That's just IG, I guess. But also they beat Suning the week before. My big thing about LGD, though, is there's a lot to get excited about in terms of the players, like Shadow obviously having an amazing time. I feel like Kramer is getting caught out of position less than he was last split. I feel like there have been 1 or 2 prime cases of that, but it doesn't feel as consistent. I feel like the laning has been pretty decent from them. But also when you look at their schedule, week number 5 is coming up. They're going to be up against RNG and they're going to be up against FPX. Now, with RNG, after the series against Suning today, after all of their recent series, I'm pretty confident in LGD. I feel like LGD is a pretty comfortable favorite for that one at this point. For the FPX series, now I don't want to get too abstract here for you, Lyric, but LGD just beat IG, and IG just beat FPX. So does that mean by default LGD is just better than FPX, right? Transitive properties. That's got to be that's science. I'm pretty sure.
No, I'm not. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. I'm not with that logic. And funnily enough, just to add on to your schedule point, after FPX, they get to play Edward Gaming. So they get a bit of like an easy, not easy one in RNG. Like RNG should lose to LGD at this point, right? After seeing that series today, my faith in RNG this split is completely gone. Like I'm not even going to believe in their players bouncing back. I ranked Ming first on my list. I am not going to put my faith in that team though. Still, though, RNG is a team who can always bounce back. FPX, I don't know if I really see it. I do think that FPX is one of the teams who mid-jungle is actually better than you in the full-on duo, and that's LGD's big strength in my mind, right? It's all about Shadow and Shie, how they work together and how they pop off. Fearness has kind of come into his own, but you're going up against Nuggery, and Nuggery has had his Nuggery moments. He has had like the 0-2s, the 0-3s, a bit of those, but maybe I'm just putting too much faith in FPX name brand, but at the same time, right, FPX might have lost to IG right now, but didn't they just beat RNG and WE like 5 or 6 days ago? So that one was a weird one. I remember specifically in that FPX series as well, where like Dwinby's just continuously trying to like dive and force on mid lane, and IG just completely punished it. IG, nice response.
It was to the point of weirdness.
Yeah.
It was to the point of weirdness, right, where he got a solo kill on Rookie, which was like, oh my god, he's going crazy on the Kled. And then it's like, there was this big skirmish. They end up 3v3 mid. And then Dwinby tries to dive. It was like, buddy, are you okay? Like, did you not see your screen? Or like, what happened there? I don't know. There was quite a few moments for FPX in that series where I just thought, like, this, it didn't feel like I was watching the same form of FPX that we have been watching for the last few weeks. It didn't feel like the same Dwinby that just got a pentakill versus RNG, right? Like,
yeah, so that's why...
I don't know, it's strange.
That's why the LGD matchup to me feels like it's not dependent on LGD at all, right? It's actually dependent on FPX, how FPX show up and like what form they're in. So,
I feel like I was just gonna say, I feel like this conversation is just the perfect example of what we were talking about of why RA is a favorite right now. Because at least we know what we're gonna get.
Right.
Because there's like basically no other teams you can say that for at this stage.
Like almost any team that is under RA, barring like miracle teams like Top Esports, you can like know that RA will probably beat them. It's teams like EG, teams like FPX, who they did beat, teams like LNG, who now they did beat as well. But it's like those are the teams you're question marking. Like, hey, can RA beat them? Because RA typically will lose to teams that have more mechanically skilled or like better tenured players in them, but also are able to match them in the macro game department. If you don't meet one of those two boxes, RA will beat you. If you either have worse players or you don't have a cohesive game plan, like RA will definitely just blow you out of the water to where, yeah, FPX, Top Esports, IG. It feels like there's so many teams you can go down the list and be like, well, depending on them, they will win or lose today.
Yeah, and then there's the huge question mark after that where it's like, Yeah, the problem is you can never quite just bank on a player in that way. The one player, actually, that I would say you can this split, it's got to be Knight, right? Knight is just, oh my God. Like, he's too good. He's too good. Knight versus Doom B, by the way. I checked the schedule yesterday. I was looking. Knight versus Doom B, going to be on Saturday, the 17th of July. Top Esports versus FPX. Honestly, in my mind, those are the two best mid laners right now. It's 2 weeks away. I'm teasing this way too early, but my God, I'm just so excited for that series to happen. I can barely contain myself. It's going to be a banger. With that said, though, we've got a guest standing by, so I'm going to pass it over to myself in the past, where I'm waiting by to have a chat with Jensen. Go over to you, Munchables. All right, welcome to the show, Jensen. For anyone that doesn't know him already, this is Jensen Go, coach for Immortals Academy. And, you've been around the scene for a very long time. So, Jensen, I just want to give you a moment here to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us kind of your journey through esports so far, how you got to where you are coaching in North America.
Wow, I think this is quite a journey, because this is a span that goes all across the globe. It starts in Singapore, where I come from. My first steps were into Taiwan before I made on my venture into Vietnam with EVOS Esports, where we went to MSI. Then I even had a stint with Splice in Europe, helping them both with the LEC team and with the Mad Lions as they went into the transition, before going down under into Australia. And then now finally in America with Immortals Academy. So it's pretty much been touring the world at this point of time. I think that this is what it means to live the jet set life. But if they do ever open up a league in Africa, maybe that's going to be my next destination.
Yeah, you got to check off Africa, Antarctica. We'll see if Indian League of Legends ever kicks off. Yeah, a couple of locations left, but verified jet setter, that is for sure. Which, Lyric, I mean, you're not too different yourself. You've been all over the shop as well.
Yeah, it's kind of weird too, because I've been I've Brazil, Turkey, Southeast Asia for a little bit. I've helped teams in other regions, so I didn't officially work for them. But it's also weird because me and Jensen used to not exactly work together, but we worked in the same vicinity when we were in the LMS. I was a coach of Hong Kong Esports. He was a coach of Fireball, and I don't want to consider that I helped get him there, but I brought on Nelson. I think a lot of people know Nelson now works for G2 to be my assistant coach.
Yep.
And there's another team looking for another coach, so I kind of deferred to Nelson. I'm like, hey, do you know anyone? And he recommended Jensen because Jensen's been around for a long time. You were casting even back all the way in season 3, weren't you, Jensen?
Yeah, I started casting towards the end of season 3, and it was actually quite a crazy story because I wasn't actually playing all that much League of Legends. I was really casual about it, but I watched a lot of StarCraft and enjoyed how people were casting in StarCraft, and Garena at the point of time, who were the people running the GPL, that's what the G stands for. They held a set of caster auditions, so I applied for it, and then somehow I got the gig, right? And then from there, that's where my love for sharing and expressing and looking at all the various tactics within the game just caught on. And from there, I had to cover these Southeast Asian teams, and I mean I'm Singaporean, and it pained me when I saw the Singaporean teams playing that badly every time. So I decided to put my money where my mouth was and start to coach them so that they actually could get better.
Yeah, look, guys, you're doing it wrong. This is how you do it. Let me come in here and fix this. So let's talk about the kind of transition, right? Because there's obviously a very long period of time since season 3 to now. In your mind, and I'd love to hear your views on this as well, Lyric. How much has coaching and the world of coaching changed since then? Because I imagine, like, I mean, esports has a big reputation, right, of coaches having a low bar of entry, certainly back in the day. I feel like that has changed a lot, though, over the last few years to where now it's a much more professional level. I feel like you have to have a lot of qualifications to be able to be coaching a top team. So talk me through kind of how you see that region of the industry has changed, because I feel like it's a region of the industry that a lot of people don't really get to hear a lot about.
Wait, do I take this?
Did
Oh,
oh
is this
wait,
for
I was so
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I was asking you, Jensen, and then I was going to ask Lyric for his
Oh, I
take
see,
after.
I see. Sorry, I thought
I
I said
thought he
Lyric.
lagged out.
Yeah. Um. So how has the coaching scene changed, right? I think like all the way back in like season 4, season 5, right? Like this is where I was starting out coaching, and at this point of time, I wouldn't even call myself a coach. I used to joke with my players I prefer if you call me the BSOD, right? It doesn't stand for blue screen. That stands for benevolent supreme overlord dictator, because coaching requires you to have a certain um, powers of legitimacy and authority, right? And back then, the coach was never really in such a position. And this is back when the coach couldn't even go on stage when I first started helping out these teams in
Hmm.
Singapore. But I mean, this is effectively in a semi-pro slash pro-am context, because there's effectively no professional teams in Singapore. So there was no organization to hire me into a position to say that, hey, you're in charge of this team, you are the coach here, and these are your responsibilities, and this is your job scope. So I never really called myself a coach at a point of time. It's only when in season 7 when I finally got to work in the LMS in a professional capacity, and then there was a manager who came and he set everything up, and he went in there, introduced me to players, and then set up a very clear hierarchy and structure. And then that's when I said, okay, this is where I can finally call myself a coach, because it's institutionalized. I'm given a certain set of powers, a certain set of authority, and this is very embedded within the culture there as well, right? Where there's a certain expectation where if you say something, the players are expected to respond, the players are expected to listen to you and take instructions from you due to how you're installed in this hierarchy. So that's one of the bigger changes that I've noticed. And even then, if you were to examine how this hierarchy compares within the East and the West, it's also kind of different as well in the way that people perceive authority, in the way that people respond to this form of structure and hierarchy. Sorry, it's just kind of lost the essence of the question, right? Which is how has coaching evolved over time, right?
No.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued. So feel free to tangent if you
Yeah,
want to.
so I mean, we've seen things change, and I think over time there's a few eras of evolution, and I think when I talk to people from other games, right, from other MOBAs at this point of time, that I don't really think I can name it, but it feels like when I talk to them and they talk about their coaching methods, it feels like I've gone back to the Ice Age, right? When I talk to some of these mobile gamers, and because mobile gaming is super big in Southeast Asia now, and the coaches who are there, they're effectively like a six pair of eyes on the team. They're just there to be an analyst, a friend of the team, and then help coordinate some of the strategy that the team is doing, rather than what's happening in League of Legends, right? Because I guess that's how things started up. I can't speak for the people who were coaching in season 3, 4, and 5 in the bigger regions, but if I'm watching things like um the team look at breaking point, then I think that's where you saw this transition, right? When Weldon came into the scene, and then he talked about there being sleep hygiene, right? Needing to fulfill the performance aspects of the out of game things, and then we started to see a much more holistic approach where a coach was coming in and handling not just the in-game tactical aspects of things, and not just being a friend of the team, or what I joke about being called a professional babysitter, but somebody who is more in charge of the holistic development of the team. And then I think you see the modern day coaching approach, which is the phase 3, where you see projects like the Mad Lions project, the Rogue project, being done in the West. You see things like the Suning project, right? Where you have people not just talking about how do we win in this split and now, but how do we develop things across 2 years, right? Like I think LNG, right? This is a team that's currently 7-1. They had this they had liked NI1D on the roster for a long period of time. They've been developing these players. You talk about making plans 2 years, 3 years in advance. What's going to be happening? I'm doing projections for these players. And then this is where, as a coach, you need to be able to kind of find your own methods in terms of assessing players, right? How do you project potential? I mean, back in the day, season 3, season 4, potential was the biggest meme, right? CLG is nothing but unfulfilled potential. But now this is something,
Liquid
yeah,
potential, yeah.
right. But now this is something that we legitimately have to look at. Like, if you look at the player, what is his growth going to be looking like? If we're bringing him on, is this a player that we want to grow with the organization for the next 2 years, for the next 3 years, and then what are the pieces that are going to be looking like? So we've moved through like 3 phases of sorts, right? From the 6 member friend of the team to the holistic development. I'm here to take care of the various domains of coaching, and this is something that I talk about when I give like coaching seminars. That's the knowledge domain, which is the tactical aspects. There's a performance domain, which deals with the out of game things, your sleep, sport psychology, your meditation, your ability to visualize the game, the relationship aspects, which deals with we can call it personality management of sorts, but it's how you handle the dynamics between players and stuff, and then the systems aspects of things, right? Which is how you codify this into something that's replicatable. And then that's where you move into the second phase, and then we talk about the planning phase, right? Where people like, I think, Peter Dunn, uh, we will see more and more people grow into that type of role, where you have somebody who comes in, and then we talk about who comes in and plans for an organization, what's going to be happening for the next 2 years. These are the players you're looking in year one. These are the players you're looking at in year two. This is the talent pipeline that you're kind of developing across a multi-year project.
I feel like a big
Damn,
thing as well
that's
that
or
that's really interesting
sorry, go on there.
is that when so right, I think league coaching really started in like season 4 if you think back to like the original at least Western coaches. Like Korean coaches had already kind of been around for a while, but they are more of like team managers, like the head coaches come from StarCraft, to where I was kind of like the second wave of coaches. I came in like late season 5 in the LMS, and like Jensen was saying, in LMS I feel like coaching is a lot more, it's like closer to how it is in Korean structure. Not exactly, but kind of like a mid ground between like that and how I perceived like Southeast Asia, China, like these types of regions that I feel like are more kind of player driven. So I never even got to really experience that first part where Jensen's talking about, like kind of like those like the ice age of coaching, really, where ground level. I feel like Western teams all went through this, but this kind of leads me to a really interesting tangent because I feel like, Jensen, you're one of the only people who've gotten to experience kind of both Eastern and Western mentalities. I've done it, but not on the same level of you as, like EU and NA. Like, you got to coach in the two major regions. And specifically for you, you've also worked in China, if only for like a very brief stint. So one thing I really want to know from your point of view is like, what's different between like China, like Chinese culture on coaching in the West, to where it does seem right, like when you watch LPL, it is a lot more about like these knife fights and mechanical plays and people being more willing to like push limits or make bad decisions, kind of whatever lens you want to view it from, as compared to maybe somewhere like LCS. Like, what's kind of your opinion on what's different behind the scenes in terms of like how things work culturally and coaching wise, and how does that translate into how different I'd say China is from a lot of the other regions?
Well, I think there's two aspects here, and it seems that you're trying to tie in like the cultural aspect to how the LPL kind of plays, right? But I'll actually kind of attribute that to the Flash Rules Exodus, right? More towards that play style thing. But let's talk a little bit about the cultural aspects first, right? So when we talked about conflict resolution, this is one of the big things that we always look at, and in terms of like respect for authority, in terms of how you're installed as an authority figure of sorts, right? And I think like one of the interesting things is that, I mean, if you follow Nelson's Twitter, he's always tweeting about how the Western teams, they don't train enough, they don't play enough. You've got a triple block, you've got to put in the extra blocks and everything. And I saw that, right? I saw Tabe coaching for a short period of time when he was in the LMS, and what he would do is that if the team is doing badly, if you lost the stage game, immediately he would book a block. Like right after you lost the stage game, you would go back to the gaming house, and the players wouldn't have a break. They just sit there, and then they will be playing a midnight block against some team in Japan or something, right? And that is the approach to it. So they see practice as a means of remedial. I wouldn't say punishment, but a form of remedial, so that they're getting the players to put in the additional games, and this form of like number counting to make sure that you get the games in, so that you get the reps in, to make sure that you can achieve peak performance of sorts. So that's it's very tied to this style of things. Whereas in the West, it's slightly different, right? You have to be more in touch with the emotional side of players, their willingness to be able to grind things out. You always have to keep that in mind. What's the emotional state and how you're able to pander to that first. And of course, this might always be my bias, right? Because I haven't had a chance to work with an extensive group of players in all the regions that I've been to. But this is just a small observation that I've made generally. It's not to say that all the Asian players are robots as well. They also have emotional sides to them, and you also have to pander to them. But it's just on a scale of how much can I go in there? How much immediate room do I have to go in there and say that, okay, this is the steel that I'm going to be placing down here, and this is what we're going to be have to be doing. And if I were to try even say a fraction of that in the West, the response to that would be much more different. And this response to coaching methods and even say coaching feedback is also going to be kind of different, right? And one of the stories that I tell people is that there's a mid laner in the East. Actually, should I mention names? Right? Never mind. I'll just say it,
If you
right?
if you want to,
Yeah, that's
depends.
totally up
That's
to you.
totally up to you, mate. That's totally up to you.
So that's I mean that's a player I worked with, right? In the I'll just say in the LMS, right? I say that Sion. I think Sion's a very good champion in the mid lane. I think that you should try it out, right? And in the West, if you were to say that, hey, I think Shaco top lane is really good, right? They just tell you you're crazy, you're out of your mind, right? And then they won't care about you. But in the East, if you were to do that, they will say, okay, sure. They'll say, yes, coach. They'll play like a few games of Scion. And if they disagree with it, they will express their disagreement by playing in a very half-hearted manner, right? So actually, the player, he went in, he played Scion, and then he started the game like 5 of solo queue, like 5-0 or something. But because he thought the pick wasn't good, so I was sitting behind him watching him play solo queue. I was watching him play the game, and he just started like randomly outing, randomly limit tasking, and then he just started dying a whole bunch. And then by the end of it, he was like 5-8, 5-9 or something, and tell me, yeah, coach, I think this champion isn't very good after all, right? So there's this like more insidious. You tell them, hey, I think this is good, go play it. Okay, I'll go play it, but they won't buy into the idea and stuff. Whereas I think even between like
It's
NA and EU is kind of different because in EU they're straight up telling, hey, I think that this is dumb, and then you guys can have a big argument about it. But if you can convince them to do it, then at least they see the logic. And even if they go 0-5 in the first game, because you have now convinced them, because of that immediate conflict that you guys had, they'll like maybe at least try a few more games off the side to see how it goes.
okay. So it's almost like malicious compliance in some cases from the
I
Asian
wouldn't say
players,
it's
where it's
like
like,
malicious. I wouldn't say it's malicious, but it's more of like their heart isn't in it. Their heart isn't in it. They will like just kind of
okay,
like go
okay.
through the motions of sorts.
It's like because the chain of authority exists, they're gonna do it no matter what. But since they don't believe in it, right? You're kind of already doomed to fail from the
Yeah.
beginning.
All right, fair enough. So let's talk bigger picture with playstyles and stuff, because obviously this is the LPL podcast, so I do want to talk about the LPL a bit here, and we're halfway through the interview already. So I think a good starting point for this conversation would just be, let's assess what the playstyle is right now in the LPL, because I feel like from MSI there's been a dramatic shift in playstyle, and I think a lot of viewers are kind of confused on why certain players are underperforming, why certain players are suddenly just popping off like crazy. And I feel like there has been a dramatic shift in the way the game's played, especially in the mid lane. The mid lane, especially, I think, is a dramatically different role to what it was just a month ago. So let's start off by just assessing where that stands. And I guess we'll go to you again, Jensen, first. If you want to tell me what your read is on how the game, I guess, should be played right
Well,
now.
I think during MSI and I think like post MSI all the way up to 11, 12. After that patch, you could say that or at least my read on it, the optimal way to play the game is double bruisers with AP jungler, right? And even on 11-12, I think they nerfed Rumble on that patch, so you would see a little bit more of like assassins, AP assassins being played. Akali has definitely been strong throughout the entire point of time, which is definitely a very big shift in pace, where Victor, Orianna, and Azir were dominating towards the end of spring, right? And I think we can see this very clearly in the teams that benefit from this and the teams that don't, right? So teams that have assassin players, teams that are really good at playing the bruises, they do well in this meta, and teams that are very reliant on playing like the mages in the mid lane, they tend to struggle a little bit more unless you're in the LCK, which is a very interesting comparison that we can bring up, right? When we look at the champions that do well in the LPL as compared to the other regions.
So I guess one thing I'm wondering is, right. So we're talking about like bruisers with AP junglers. You have been following LPL, obviously, right? You're coaching, so you don't have time to watch every match when it's live, every like kind of point of the day. Is there any team that stands out to you in LPL that like you stylistically like to watch? Because again, we worked closely before. I remember back in the day, Flash Rules was your team that you'd always go to and like look for of like how to do something or how to improve. Because I feel like the most interesting thing about LPL is with 17 teams, we do have like so many different styles, right? Like EDG plays so much different than top esports, who plays so much different than FPX. Is there any team who stands out to you right now who you really like the way they play, and kind of like what's the reason for it?
Oh, it's the same coach. Snake coached the Flash Wolves. He's coaching FPX now.
Yeah.
FPX, let's go. Right. I mean, it's not just Snake being there for some time now since 2019. I think the way that OMB has been playing the game, the way that he's been placing this very heavy emphasis on map play, right, and map movement in the game has been something that I've looked at. I tried to learn a lot from. I've something that I've tried to very actively teach my teams as well. Uh, but mostly, yeah, it's definitely FPX is a team that I look up to the most, and I think that for something that's a little bit simpler, because I think the FPX style, if you want to learn that, as you can see, like in the losses against LNG and stuff, right? It's a very finesse style, where sometimes even if you step up and you hit the turret that you shouldn't be hitting, you can put yourself in a very bad situation. So there's like downsides to it, and if you play it correctly, like the game against IG, right? There's a 4-0 Draven in the game. How do they put that back, right? And if you do it really well, and you can create what I call the blast on the map, which is a deep push side lane wave, you can create so many opportunities for yourself because you understand the map movement of the game. You're always going to be able to force number superiorities at certain points of time. Now, I would say that this idea of map control and number superiority is not exclusive to FPX. I would think that across the board, most of the LPL teams they have some form or some variation in terms of how they approach this idea of map control. And I think that there's an evolution of that ever since Suning played Damwon at Worlds, and then the way they responded to the Drake objective, in which how this thought process started to be crafted of sorts. Now, I don't really know where to start, right? Like you mentioned, the 17 teams in the LPL, so maybe let's just throw out some names out there, and then we can see where we can get going with.
I was gonna say, I was actually gonna tangent to that. Like, so how would you compare them in like to how you feel about FPX compared to a team like EDG, who has been kind of dominating the split, have like a much, I'd say, slower first 15 minutes of the game, but seem to be able to like choke you out once they like find a footing somewhere, and they're kind of able to exert that same sort of map control, but they don't really have the same proactivity as a team like FPX in finding it to begin with.
So I think FPX is the most extreme when it comes to this map control idea, right? The number of times you see them play on three lanes, when they're what I call even equals on the map. So that means it's either you have one side lane pushed in and then the others push back into you, or both side lanes are even. It's actually very rare. You always see them very aggressively shifting onto two lanes, or when you see them shifting into three lanes, it is to sneak the wave so that they can create that positive wave for them to play on. EDG is a little bit slower, and I think that this contrasts the way the LPL plays. I would say slightly closer to the way I would say LEC plays of sorts, but I wouldn't even say that for sure, right? Because if you look at this two lane playstyle, there's two approaches to playing on two lanes. There's the more old school 1-4-0, where what you have is one person pushing out the side lane and then four people contesting mid lane, so that you don't get dole from the mid lane, and then you can maybe contest for mid priority at some point of time as well, and then you then shift into the side lane to make your strong side play after that. Or whereas there's the modern day LPL approach, right, where you see these four people or sometimes three people rushing a side lane, and then they're controlling the river through the side lanes itself. And I think that FPX is very, very heavy towards controlling the game through the side lanes. And then EDG, it's slightly, so it's on a skill, right? So it is still, this game is still a very favorite towards controlling the game towards the side lane. But you see EDG putting numbers in mid lane a bit more often. And then their ability to use these TPs, I think is also slightly less. I mean, I haven't watched all that many EDG games because most of the games I watch, they win through player quality. So I don't watch it as much as compared to FPX, where FPX wins a lot through tactical brilliancies, right? So I'm not sure how accurate my statement is, but this is the general feel that I got like when I was like skimming through the VODs for the spring playoffs.
I mean, I still feel like that's a really interesting concept that I've never even heard anyone vocalize of, like, you saying it's a spectrum. It's not just like black or white of, all inning on this aspect or one aspect, because typically whether it's, coaches, analysts, casters, you just kind of put a team in a box and that's kind of it, right? So I don't know. That's a pretty interesting take. So EDG playing more around mid, FPX more creative. So I guess I can understand then why you would favor a team like FPX over an EDG as a coach and as someone who I know is like a very cerebral mind of, because right, EDG do outskill a lot of teams to where FPX, we've seen they aren't able to do that this split, especially through their bot lane. I think Nuguri not having, as great of a split, but I still think Nuguri definitely an insane player. But yeah,
So I'd love to shift the. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Lurk. If
shift the conversation, Munch. Shift it.
I want to take a complete opposite, or at least from my perspective as someone who isn't an analyst, right? I have very much layman's terms for me. How does we're talking about FPX, we're talking about EDG and the way that they play the map and how cerebral it is, and the different contrasts between those two styles. But how then does that contrast to a team like Top Esports, for example, who are also definitely in the conversation as one of the better teams in the LPL. Obviously, not necessarily standings reflected, but let's be honest, they just beat EDG today, so I think we can say that they're looking like a top team. Like, because it feels to me like it's a much more chaotic style, or am I just missing a lot of the finer details there?
From my perspective, I would definitely agree with you. All right, top esports in terms of like what they're watching. In fact, I actually find it a lot more interesting to watch top esports play because their early game styles are actually I think it's one of the best in the league, right? When people are playing in the farming jungle meta, Carcer was playing like Gragas, and then he was doing like the ganking the bot lane, and then they have all these correct responses towards these snowballs, right? And if you were to contrast that with like IG, right? You saw the Diana, she did like a 3 cam, 4 cam to dive bot, and their response to that and knowing how to snowball that isn't as on point or as refined as how TES might have made the same play as well. I think TES definitely has some of the best player quality. So when it comes to like, taking fights and stuff, maybe that's just how they're playing towards their strengths, right? If we know that we're gonna outskill you, we're gonna outfight you, so who cares about macro, right? If we're gonna win in the early game, then who needs this macro, right? And I think it came back to bite them in the spring playoffs as well. That's how the RNG were able to get the backdoor in because TS, I think, since Worlds last year, they have been the ARAM team. They have been what every NA team kind of aspires to be. The team that just runs it down mid. Who cares about side lanes? And then we're just gonna fight you randomly in the mid lane and win those fights, right? And it's not ideal, but it works for them. And they're able to get themselves into those positions because of how good Karsa and the rest of the team is at setting up the early game. So
I think that's one thing I really like about TS, and something I feel like a lot of people, I think people forget this a lot, especially like they're very critical and like very niche fans of like a region like LPL or any league, is that at the end of the day, it's only about winning games. Like, we always try to view the lens of like who is the best team, but at the end of the day, if you're the best team and you don't win games, it actually doesn't matter that you're the best team. This is like a competition, and the win at the end of the day is all that matters. So
I'm just saying, spring playoffs, man. I'm just saying.
That's true. That's true. But I feel like that's why it's very hard, or I feel like it should be very hard to criticize teams like TS or like IG when they're winning, and why it's like, if this is your strength, you know that, and sure, are you putting a level of human element in that realistically you shouldn't be able to? Like, you shouldn't be able to expect your opponent to give these windows or make these mistakes or whatever. No, but I still think realistically, when the competition's about winning, it is still like a viable path to like get there.
I actually would say that even the things that TS does, as crazy and as chaotic as it looks, there's a certain method to the madness. There is a certain method to the madness in the way that they play, right? So things like especially the stuff they do in the early games. So when I look at TS, like the fights and stuff like that later on in the game, it's like, sure, it's entertaining to watch, and you can talk. That's like a system and how like they set up the objectives as well. I don't necessarily agree with the system, but usually it's the early game, right? Where I will show players a VOD. It's like the first 7 minutes, that's how they play. And then that is the replicatable parts of it. It looks crazy, but it actually if you think about it, there's a certain logic behind it, right? Like how do they get compensation back for like doing these tree camp ganks to enable Karsa to not be completely out of the game, as compared to say when some other jungler does it in some other region.
Yeah.
So do you hold specifically Karsa in quite high regard then? Because I feel like Karsa is one of those junglers that a lot of people
Super
will
polarizing.
compliment massively, right? A lot of people will be like, this guy's just a genius, he's the best ever, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people kind of don't see it because he has such a dramatically different style to so many current junglers. I feel like he sees the game differently. Do you personally hold Karsa in quite high regard then? It sounds like you do.
It's similar to SOFM, right? Like, I wouldn't really like my tiering is very simple. If I watch this player and if I can take what he does and it's replicatable, I can show it to one of my players and say that, hey, this is something interesting that this guy's doing. This is the logic behind it, and this is how you can replicate it, and this is how it's useful in these situations. That's a tier one jungler to me. And Karsa's in that tier, SOFM's in that tier, Kenyon is in that tier as well.
Damn,
Wow.
that's a
So
pretty.
very high regard. I will say I'm kind of surprised that those are the three junglers because in my mind they're all completely different directions,
Yeah.
right? But it makes sense based on your logic on how you're tiering them. So that's really really interesting to hear. So we are running out of time. So I just want to jump into one last question. And we'll just hit this one quite quickly. But I've got to ask you, Jensen. We're about halfway through the split. We're heading towards playoffs. Who are your top four in the LPL right now? Who are the four teams that are going to
Oh,
make it to the World
jeez.
Championship?
I think FPX and EDG they should be shoe-ins. So those are the two easy ones, right? Now, so the two hard ones.
Yeah,
I mean, it helps that LNG lost the game.
really
It
hard
helps that
ones.
LNG lost the game because if they didn't lose this game
Yeah,
to RA, it is very possible they actually end the season 14-2 in first place in the LPL, maybe second place, and they still don't make worlds, right? Because of the way their schedule works out. They only play like EDG and TES as their last two games, and then from here on out, it's a soft schedule for them. So I'll expect them to stay behind the standings. I still do not have LNG making worlds. I actually think RA is a dark horse to be the fourth team from the LPL because the way they play, I think
really.
it's like what we are talking about, right? It's not flashy, it's not great, but it's simple and it's effective, and they're gonna score a lot of wins against teams that just drop games to them. And with where they finish in spring, I think they should have a decent amount of circuit points to make the playoff bracket.
Mhm.
And I think against some of their teams, they should be able to pick up free wins, right? They play very effectively. You get a bad draft against them, they just stack the Drakes, they get the soul against you, and they can grind things up with scaling. Fovo's a really good player as well, so I think RA should will be my third team that I think is gonna finish in. They'll be the last team to qualify from the LPL. But
Mhm.
as for who would the last team be, I think that this one is really really hard to call. My personal guess
Yeah,
is TES. My personal take is going to be top esports, right?
He
yeah,
believes in the mojo, Munch. He believes in the
Yeah.
mojo.
the mojo. It's too strong. Nobody can resist
I
the
mean, part of me
mojo.
is hoping for tuning,
Well,
but they need a new
yeah, me
support.
too. But I'm not gonna lie. Hey, they got one. SOFM is here to save the day. All right, we got to wrap things up. Jensen, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you've got going on in your life right now that you want to shout out? Any content coming out, or just your Twitter or your Twitch or whatever it is? Please have a moment and just shout out whatever you're getting on with.
Well, for those of you who have been following the Immortals Academy, we haven't been doing too hot because we had two players in Canada, but as of this week, they're both in LA and they'll be playing. So if you're interested in watching what's happening for the Immortals
Oh,
Academy team, we play every Wednesday and Thursday, sometime between 1, 3, or 5 p.m. LA time.
There we go,
awesome. So
Superman.
make sure you check that out. This guy he's a 5 head, so you got to expect that with the full squad, they're going to be picking some wins up. Thank you so much, Jensen, for joining us, and we'll continue with the rest of the episode. So thank you very much, and I can't wait to watch your team.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
All right, there we have it. So thanks once again, Jensen, for coming on the show. Really, really great to hear from such an experienced coach. I have to say, I was really intrigued listening to the way he was describing how strategies have evolved over the years, the way that 1-4 works nowadays to how it did 5 years ago. I think that's really intriguing. I would love to dive deeper into that kind of thing. But I think the initial bounce off topic that we've just got to hit straight away, Lyric, his top 4, EDG FPX, I think pretty unarguable. And then he had RA there as the 3rd spot, and then Tez as like the throwaway, which to me, top esports is like completely a shoo-in for the top 3. And then it's like maybe RA for the 4th one. It's crazy to me that was like the other way around in his mind.
So it's funny because I think what he meant is like RA will be the 4th seed in his mind, like for sure 4th, to where the 3rd seed's like, I don't know who that's going to be. So he still predicts top esports to be over RA. Just, it is funny that RA is more clear in his mind than top esports. But surprisingly, if you ask me right now of which 4 teams I would think are going to Worlds, I would actually have the same 4. And, you know, we hit on RA earlier in the segment. I think RA probably is the most controversial one. But that's what I'm saying right now. Because RA is also the team out of those 4 that when it comes to playoffs, it comes to a best of 5, that I have the least faith in. So I'm a lot more positive on top esports going through than Jensen was, and a lot less sure of RA. But then you look at the list of other teams. I would say I have less faith in LNG in a best of 5 than I do in RA, because I think Rare Atom has better players. I think Rare Atom has a similar style to LNG, but have a better early game. And we even saw Rare Atom was willing to like flip the script, bring out different comps to beat LNG. So there's even a bit of at least diversity there. And then you go through the list. It's like, okay, JDG and RNG, I think 2 other easy teams to get behind right now are absolutely tragic. Absolutely tragic. There's no way in good faith I could say I would have them going to Worlds at this point in time. Yep. And then I think OMG, LGD, all these other teams, they have it worse in my opinion of like, well, they have newer players or newer lineups. Like, again, when it comes to LPL playoffs, I don't know what to expect. Teams like OMG being extremely limited in terms of Cream is an absolute beast and a monster, but he only plays one way, right? He only plays one style of champions. Who knows if the meta shifts? LGD, man, I will never bet on like Kramer and Mark ever, which is crazy because they just made it. They just made it to Worlds, and I'm not even saying they're bad, but like the fact that they were able to gap IG's bot lane last year blows my mind. And like maybe they do it again. I'm just not going to bet on that. To where iBoy and Hung, I know they can gap some bot lanes. Fofo, one of the best mid laners in the league. I think Cube is solid. Lil Yen to me is the biggest unreliable mark on this team.
That was going to be the thing that I brought up, because you said like when I talk about LNG versus RA, they're just better players. I'm like, dude, you mocked my Lien draft where we drafted our super teams. You mocked me, and yet I did. Well, I mean, I don't mean every player. I mean, Tarzan is definitely better than Lien, but like Lien just plays so selfishly that I'm not like a huge fan of it. I still think he's like a very good player. Mechanically, he works quite well. Has his like picks where he pops off. But yeah, I think RA for me is a team that right now I would peg making Worlds. Jensen pegs him making Worlds. He's a big brain guy who coaches all around the world. Therefore, I'm right. Anyone who disagrees, qualification by authority or
yeah.
What is it? There's
logical fallacies, baby.
Yeah, some appeal to authority. That's the name of it. The thing. Yeah, I feel like we're in a weird spot when we look at the standings, aren't we? Compared to where we were a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago, I was like, wow, we've got like 12 teams that could make it to the World Championship. And now I'm like, we've got 3 teams that are definitely making it. And then we've got a selection of teams that someone is going to get to that 4th slot. But I'm not sure that... I feel like when we get to that World Championship, I'm really, really hoping that people go in with a different attitude towards the 4th seed than what we saw for LGD in 2020. Because I think like a 4th seed at the World Championship should not have the same expectations as like the higher seeds coming out from the region. This is a team that didn't do so hot in playoffs. This is a team that managed to make it out through the regional finals.
Disagree, right? Munchables. Disagree. And you know why? You know why I disagree? Because LGD weren't our 4th best team in LPL 2020 summer. That's why I disagree. They weren't the 4th best team. They weren't. They got there because they had points, because of Spring. If Victory 5 were in that regional gauntlet,
come on,
they would have gone to Worlds. I'm not even memeing. I'm not even like personal bias.
Okay.
I truly think they were the 4th best team. IG would have done better.
You think V5 over IG, really?
Yeah, 100%.
Dude, bring back Teacher, man. That's all I have to say on the topic.
There we go.
Yeah, I definitely think IG could have made a good attempt, but I don't think
But
that they would have had dramatically. I don't think IG would have been contesting for the final, you know?
and the thing I actually want to hit on back to your point of like expectations for a fourth seed is I think the expectation should be at least 3-3 in their group. That's my expectation of a fourth seed from LPL. They're at least going to get 3-3.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes it out of groups or not, but I think a fourth seed from LPL can contest every other region's first or second seed. They might not win. They might not be a favorite, but it will be playable. Like we saw with LGD, right? They were able to have competitive games with Gen G, Fnatic, and TSM.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, and a good way to kind of round that conversation out. I agree. I think that they should certainly be expected to make it through play-ins. Anyone that's, like if they struggle in play-ins, there are issues. But yeah, I think when it gets to the group stage, the top teams from other regions should receive some respect. I do want to very quickly hit on that as a topic. What do you reckon in terms of like, I'm not feeling quite as just infinitely confident in the strength of the LPL as I was a couple of weeks ago. I feel like we're seeing a lot more issues in amongst the top teams over the last week or so, comparatively to what we did in the first 2 weeks. And whether that's just like expectations have changed, whether that's the like refiguring out identities, the meta slowly shifting, I'm not entirely sure. But certainly I don't feel like we have the same level of top 10 teams that we did just a week ago.
So the coach in me is actually that makes me feel more confident. When I see our team struggling, I'm like, thank God they're struggling right now instead of struggling when it matters. Because again, I've been there. I've been there where your team absolutely is dominating all split long. You get to that game that matters. You get your like first bit of pressure, and your team just completely falls apart. And it is the worst. It is much better to lose when you're allowed to lose than it is to like not. Especially in LPL where you play so many games. I try to take very little from losses or wins. It's not until like you get like big streaks like EDGs or like LNG beating consistent teams where you'd be like, okay, I can put a bit of faith in this team. But even still, I'm still so skeptical about so much because like, man, I need to see how you compete under pressure. Because again, from being there, that is the hardest part of the job. It's like, yes, thank you, LPL. Struggle right now. If they kept going undefeated, I would feel so bad for Worlds. I would be scared.
Dude, G2 fans over in Europe are listening to you speaking right here, just like huffing that copium, just believing
Let's go.
off the back of that. That's all the time we've got for today. We're going to round out the episode. Thank you very much for joining me, as always, Lyric. And thank you once again, Jensen, for joining us for the interview. Really, really great to hear from such an intelligent coach. And with that, we're going to round things out. So we will see you guys in the LPL stream. But until then, we'll see you in Champ Select.